Hello students, from today we will start chapter 8, that is sources of business finance. This chapter provides an overview of the various sources from where funds can be procured for starting as also for running a business. Clear? So, it's important for any person who wants to start a business to know about the different sources from where money can be raised. The requirement of funds by business to carry out its various activities is called business finance. A business cannot function unless adequate funds are made available to it. Sources of finance are the most explored area, especially for the entrepreneurs about to start a new business. It is perhaps the toughest part of all the efforts. There are various sources of finance classified on the time period, ownership and control, and sources of generation of finance. Business is concerned with the production and distribution of goods and services for the satisfaction of needs of society. For carrying out various activities, therefore, is called the lifeblood of any business. Means for carrying out all those activities, business requires money. Clear? The need for funds arises from the stage when an entrepreneur makes a decision to start a business. Some funds are needed immediately and some funds are required for day-to-day operations. So when we do the financial needs analysis of any of the business firm, we come to know that they are categorized into two: fixed capital requirement and working capital requirements. Fixed capital are those money that we invest in fixed assets such as buildings, plant, equipments, land and vehicle. These funds required in fixed assets remain invested in the business for a long period of time. Different business units need varying amount of fixed capital depending on the various factors such as nature of business and scale of business. The financial requirements of an enterprise do not end with the procurement of fixed assets. No matter how small or large business is, it needs fund for its day-to-day operations. This is known as working capital of an enterprise, which is used for holding current assets such as stock of materials, bill receivables, and for meeting current expenses like salaries, wages, taxes, or rent. Or we can say that there are various sources of procuring funds. The sources of funds can be categorized using different bases, that is, on the basis of period, on the basis of ownership, and on the basis of sources of generation. In this chapter, or now in new syllabus, we will only study about the classification of sources of finance on the basis of ownership. Classification on the basis of ownership. It is categorized into two: owner's fund and borrowed fund. Owner's fund is further classified into equity shares or shares, retained earnings, and borrowed funds are categorized into debentures, bonds, loans from banks, loans from financial institutions, public deposit, lease financing, and commercial paper. Now let's see, what do you mean by owner's fund? Owner's fund refers to the funds contributed by the owners as well as the accumulated profit of the company. This fund remains with the company and it has no liability to return this fund. For example, equity shares, preferential shares, retained earning. Now we will start with the retained earning. A company generally does not distribute all its earnings amongst the shareholders as dividend. A portion of the net earning may be retained in the business for use in the future. This is known as retained earning. It is the statement which shows how much of the firm's earning were retained in the business rather than paid out in the dividends. It is the sum of annual retained earnings for each year of the firm's history. Retained earning is a source of internal financing or self financing or flowing back of profits. Next type of owner's fund are shares. The capital owned by issue of shares is known as share capital. The capital of a company is divided into small units called shares. Shares are categorized into equity shares and preference shares. We will see what are equity shares and preference shares in details. The money raised by issue of equity shares is called equity share capital, while the money raised by issue of preference shares is called preference share capital. Now, preference shares and equity shares. First, let's see what are equity shares. Equity shares are those shares which are entitled to dividend and repayment only after the claims of preference shares have been satisfied. That is, an equity shareholder is entitled to all the profits of a company after setting the fixed claim on preference shares. They are called as real owner of the company because they have voting rights and full right to participate in the management of the company. They enjoy the reward as well as bear the risk of ownership. Their liability, however, is limited to the extent of capital contributed by them in the company. They are referred to as residual owners since they receive what is left over. All other claims on the company's income and assets have been settled. Now, meaning of preference shares. Preference shares are those which have preferential right to the payment of dividend during the lifetime of the company and a preferential right to the return of capital when the company is wound up. Preference shares also have a right to participate or in part of excess profits left after being paid to equity capital shareholders. They have a right to participate in the premium at the time of redemption, but these shares or these shareholders do not carry any voting rights in the management of the company. A company can issue different types of preference shares. So let's see what are the types of preference shares. The first types: cumulative preference shares and non-cumulative preference shares. The preference shares which enjoy the right to accumulate unpaid dividends in the future years in case the same is not paid during a year are known as cumulative preference shares. On the other hand, on non-cumulative shares, dividend is not accumulated if it is not paid in a particular year. The next types are convertible preference shares and non-convertible preference shares. Preference shares that can be converted into equity shares within a specified period of time are known as convertible preference shares. On the other hand, non-convertible shares are such that cannot be converted into equity shares. Next type: participating and non-participating. Preference shares which have a right to participate in the further surplus of a company shares which after dividend at a certain rate has been paid on equity shares are called participating preference shares. The non-participating preference are such which do not enjoy such rights of participation in the profits of the company. They are entitled to only fixed rate of dividend. And finally, it is redeemable and non-redeemable preference shares. Redeemable preference shares are those preference shares whose amount can be returned by the company to their holder within the lifetime of the company, subject to the terms of the issue and fulfillment of certain legal conditions laid down in the Section 80 of the Companies Act. The amount of non-redeemable preference shares can be returned only when company is wound up or company is going to liquidate. In addition to the various sources discussed, Means sources of owners fund discussed earlier. There are various avenues for organization to raise funds internationally. With the opening up of an economy and with the operations of business organization becoming global, Indian companies have an access to funds in the global capital market. So, from the international capital market, an organization, including multinational companies, depends on sizable borrowing in rupees as well as in the foreign currencies. There are few instruments which can be used as an equity shares are used by the companies to generate funds globally. These are known as depository receipts. Means depository receipts are used to generate funds from international capital market in the form of equity shares. Now, what are depository receipts? A depository receipt is a type of negotiable transferable financial security that is traded on a local stock exchange but represents a security usually in the form of equity that is issued by a foreign publicly limited or listed company. Means as I have told you, depository receipt is a type of equity share, and for the security purpose it is not sold directly to the foreign investors, but it is sold through the bank in the form of depository receipts. There are various types of depository receipts. American depository receipts, that is ADR, global depository receipts, that is GDR, and Indian depository receipts, that is IDR. We will see what are global depository receipts in details. It is an instrument in the form of depository receipts or certificate created by the overseas depository bank outside India and issued to the non-resident investors against the issue of ordinary shares or foreign currency convertible bonds of issuing company. Here, the local currency shares of company are delivered to the depository bank. The depository bank issues depository receipts against these shares. Such depository receipts are denominated in US dollars, are known as GDR or Global Depository Receipts. It is a negotiable instrument and can be traded freely like any other security. In the Indian context, a GDR is an instrument issued abroad by an Indian company to raise funds in some foreign currency. A holder of GDR can at any time convert it into the number of shares it represents. Now coming to the ADR, that is American Depository Receipts. The depository receipts issued by a company in the USA are known as American Depository Receipts. ADRs are bought and sold in American markets like regular stocks. It is similar to a GDR except that it can be issued only to the American citizen and can be listed and traded on a stock exchange of US. They were introduced as a result of the complexities involved in the buying shares in foreign countries and the difficulties associated with the trading at different prices and currency values. Now, IDR, that is Indian Depository Receipts. An Indian Depository Receipt is a financial instrument denominated in Indian rupees in the form of a depository receipt. It is created by an Indian depository to enable a foreign company to raise funds from the Indian security market. The IDR is a specific Indian version of the similar global depository receipts. After the owner's fund, let's see what are borrowed funds. But basically we will discuss the details of borrowed funds in another lecture video. So in this video you have studied about the sources of various business finance, their classification. Basically we studied only about the classification on the basis of ownership, and in this lecture video details of types of owner's fund. Thank you all for your patient watching and listening.